How's it going? Mike Marlinsky here with Wretched Sound. Welcome to episode 17 of the Black Sabbath series, which I guess is technically season 3 of the podcast here. It's no longer All the Metal Podcast, in case you're just rejoining us. It's now Wretched Sound Podcast, and it's no longer the metal webzine, it's Wretched Sound, and it's been that way since late July, early August. So tonight, Billie Page of Wrong the Oppressor and myself will be discussing the 17th studio album by Black Sabbath called Cross Purposes. And this album brings Tony Martin back to the band on lead vocals. Now, I have to divulge something right off the bat. Billie and I both agree that this is a lazy album. We're not crazy about this album. But at the same time, because we share that opinion, I'm very excited to do this episode because I don't think we've ever spoken poorly of a Black Sabbath record on the show before. But we're about to tonight, for a variety of reasons, most of which I'm sure you can guess if you're familiar with the record and you also share this opinion. So without further ado, let's give Billie a call and get into it. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Oh.
Billie, what's happening?
Not much, Mike. How you doing?
Doing pretty well. I have to admit, I'm a little excited about tonight because we share this negative opinion about this record, and we haven't really been too negative about Sabbath on the show yet, so...
No, we'll make up for it today.
Yeah, so we'll see how this goes. So, I'm ready if you are, if you're ready to just dive right in.
I'm ready to just dive right in.
Well, I mean, I guess I want to talk about the silver lining first, and the silver lining is, of course, Tony Martin. So, seeing Dio come and go again after Dehumanizer certainly rocked the Black Sabbath bandwagon, but perhaps the only undeniable positive about Cross Purposes is Tony Martin's return to the band. So, what do you feel about Tony's vocal delivery, at least, and just Tony coming back to front the band?
I think it sounds as lazy as the rest of the album. Honestly, as much as I would love to be stoked about him being back in the band, not that his voice necessarily sounds bad, but he sounds very uninspired on this album. He's not doing anything as cool as he did on, like, Tear or The Headless Cross. His vocal delivery, while he's still a much better singer than I am, to say, he's not really doing anything remarkable, nothing very interesting. And mind you, that could be just, I don't know if that's him, or because he was left with so little to work with on this album.
You know what it is? Like, that is the word that I kept going back to, too, is uninspired. And that's my general feeling on the whole record. And it's not even that it's bad, it's just that, like, for the most part, this exact lineup has done so much better prior to this album.
Right, I was saying that to a friend of mine after giving this a couple listens again, and I was just like, if this was like a brand new band putting this record out,
sure,
it would be really good.
Right.
But because it's a Black Sabbath album, it's really boring.
Yeah, I mean, think about everything they've done up until this point. So at this point it's 1994, and this is the 17th album. So, with all the different incarnations of the band, they've already put out so much stellar material, and it's like, at this point, you have a lot to live up to, and this record just doesn't measure up. It's like stumbling in the road, you know? Uninspired is the word. That's the word I kept going back to as well. But you know, when we talked about this, we talked about how we felt about it, and how we felt it was a lazy record, and how this was going to be a short episode. Like, I wanted to do some research to kind of flesh it out and see if anything cool was going on during the making of this record. And I did find some really cool topics that they do talk about, that Tony Martin does talk about. So, like, The coolest lyrical theme of the album is probably For Hand That Rocks the Cradle, and that's about Beverly Owlett, a children's hospital nurse in England, found guilty of serial infanticide. I will admit that I do love the intro for Cross of Thorns. I love eerie, clean guitar. Psychophobia is another cool song lyrically, as it's about David Koresh, the Branch Davidian cult leader who led 76 people to burn to death in Waco, Texas in 1993. So another cool, like the serial infanticide thing, like the cult, the mass death in, the mass burning, I should say, in Waco, Texas. Like, I'm not, like, excited that either of these things happened, but, like, it's great material for metal songs, metal lyrics, I guess. And the main riff in the song Psychophobia, like, stands out to me because it's heavy and it's kind of prog, but other than that, that song doesn't really go anywhere. So it's another uninspired song that doesn't really travel. So, like, is there even one song on this record that stands out to you that you could say you like that stands against other songs?
Virtual Death.
Yeah.
It's the most standout track on there. But you're right, like Psychophobia does have a couple parts that stand out a little more.
Yep.
And Immaculate Deception also.
Yep.
A little more. Like those three songs, I know they're right in a row, but they kind of have some more. Like Virtual Death, I think, is the only song that fully sounds interesting in the grand scheme of this album. But even by Black Sabbath standards, it's still kind of subpar. But it's at least one where it feels like they're almost trying to do something else.
Sure.
A little more interesting.
Sure. Try to take it somewhere, try to, use the resources, the human resources that they have and take it somewhere, right? Next, I was just going to ask you if you agree that this is the laziest sounding Sabbath album, but I think we've already addressed that, and we found better words to describe it.
Yeah, I've never heard of somebody saying a record sounds phoned in, and then I felt it was as true as I do with this.
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally. And really, it's because of later on, I'm going to get into the best review I've read pertaining to this album. Really what it is like, look at everything that came before just the last couple, like Headless Cross, Tear, Dehumanizer, like, and then this hits, and it just... Especially when you go and you listen to all the Black Sabbath albums in order, when you get to Cross Purposes after listening to Headless Cross, Tear, and Dehumanizer, it's just, you can't make it. I tried listening to it again today, and I couldn't get past the 6th track.
Yeah,
so,
it's like normally when we're doing this, I'm like listening to the album over and over again for a couple days, and I don't get bored. I'm just like I'm hearing new things that like I didn't catch before, for the purpose of this. And this album, I was just like, I listened to it like 1.5 times. I'm like, okay, this is the only Black Sabbath album that I do not own a physical copy of.
Wow.
And when we were going to dive into this, I was like, we're going to go into this, I'm going to listen to this again, I'm going to be like, man, I really need to track a copy of this down.
Right.
And I'm doing exactly the opposite.
Right, yeah.
That I really don't need a physical copy of this.
Sure.
With that said, when it gets reissued, I'm definitely going to buy it.
Yeah, I remember picking it up again. I remember last Christmas, I was gifted the live album, and that had a poster in it. So that poster is on my wall, and I'm looking at it right now. I have a Cross Purposes poster that I did not pay for.
Why is there a live album for this one?
Right. I know.
And honestly, until I was reading about this thing, I didn't even realize Geezer Butler played on this album.
Yes, he did.
Which just somehow made it worse.
He left right before Forbidden, but Geezer Butler did play on this record.
And it's like, what the fuck? That just makes it even less.
Yeah, you would think that Geezer Butler would have added a certain something.
And it's like, come on.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we might be able to get into it, but while we're just dwelling on how bad this is, because I was talking to my friend at work about this thing, kind of trying to, I thought when I did some reading up on this album, I might get an answer to this.
Right.
But I didn't. But I think I know why this record sounds the way it does.
I would love to hear it.
I think that Tony Iommi was just fucking sick of it. You know, they got Dio back. They were starting to get, you know, Q was a big success. They got Tony Iommi. They got fucking Dio back. You know, everything was like coming up Black Sabbath again, you know?
Right.
And then Dio quit.
Yeah, and then he had to go back to the secondary lineup, right?
And then you have Tony Martin, who just, you know, they were doing the solo album, which, again, like we discussed our last episode together, neither of us knew existed. So obviously that didn't do very well.
Sure.
So I feel like they probably just weren't. I feel like they forced it to even make this album.
Right. Right.
I feel like mentally they probably weren't in a good place. I don't know if they owed the label of the album, which could have been why they ended up doing it anyhow.
Sure.
And plus, you figure this is 1994. This was like basically the end of metal for a while.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, so things. I mean, so we, you know, looking back and kind of putting all that into focus, there's a lot of excuses as to why this album isn't that great. It wasn't a good point in time, like for many reasons, for the way the music industry was going, for the way the last things ended with Sabbath. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I wish I could find some verification if that was it. To where maybe it was like, well, fuck, we gotta make another album.
Yeah, that's what it sounded like. That's what it sounds like to me.
We gotta make another album.
Yeah, it sounds like they didn't necessarily want to do it, or Tony Iommi didn't necessarily want to do it. It was just time to make another Black Sabbath record. So here's what I got, you know?
Yeah, but then there's a live album and a live DVD for it. And
sure.
It's like, why?
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, I mean, we're close to the anniversary of Eddie Van Halen's death. It's worth mentioning that I think that just passed. So it's worth mentioning that the song Evil Eye was co-written by Eddie Van Halen, though Warner Brothers prevented EVH from getting his writing credit on the Sabbath release. It seems that Cross Purposes as an album is nowhere near as interesting as the people who helped create it and the other projects they were involved in at the time. So, I mean, honestly, I have to admit, I didn't even know that about Evil Eye until this week.
Right, yeah, neither did I. And again, it's honestly, because I don't find any of the songs very interesting, it makes it more of a bummer that it's like, okay, so here we have a song that Eddie Van Halen helped write, Tony Iommi helped write, and Geezer Butler was involved in, and it's still fucking boring.
Yeah. Yeah, it really makes you scratch your head. This album's a head scratcher for sure.
Right. It doesn't make any sense.
Right. It makes you go, yeah. Yeah, drummer Bobby Rodinelli left the recording sessions for Quiet Riot's Terrified album to join Sabbath and put out Cross Purposes. So, what's your opinion on that business decision?
Well, it's unfortunate for him that he ended up playing on the worst Black Sabbath album ever.
Yeah.
But it probably still sold better than that Quiet Riot album did.
Sure. At the time, sure. Yeah, of course. So you brought up Virtual Death, and you also brought up the end of metal, which brings me, because we're talking about the mid-'90s, so, like, brings me to my next point, and, like, you might not have heard it, but I actually really like the song Virtual Death a lot, but mostly because it doesn't sound like Sabbath to me. It reminds me of Alice in Chains a lot more, which is perfect for a record that came out in 1994. So, like, did you catch any dirty grunge vibes on that song, or did you not hear it that way?
No, I did. I definitely heard in that song and in a couple other parts, I can't think of them offhand, I definitely felt a bit like of an Alice in Chains.
Yeah.
But but I mean, Alice in Chains, even though they're not like a Sabbath sounding band,
sure,
you can definitely hear. They're definitely one of those bands where you can hear the Sabbath influence.
Yeah, they're a grunge band, but they're a heavy fucking band.
You know, and so I wasn't, you know, I knew this was the 90s, so I figured, well, I guess that makes sense. And I guess it's kind of sad that if Black Sabbath maybe would have went more in that direction for this album.
Right.
I feel like they probably would have still gotten a lot of criticism for it, but I think at this point in time, we'd be looking at the album more favorably.
Sure. Yep.
You know, because again, you know, with however you want to label grunge, it gets pretty heavy with bands like Alice in Chains and certain Soundgarden stuff. It's, you know, it is basically just like dirtier metal.
Yep, absolutely. Totally is.
And Black Sabbath probably could have made that work. You know, it's not like Virtual Death. I got shows where Black Sabbath probably could have utilized that correctly.
Sure. Taken advantage of the time and dated it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But who knows?
Right. Yep, not the world we live in, unfortunately. So my favorite online review of Cross Purposes was written by an author who just goes by the moniker Sweetie on Metal Archives. And this is not a direct quote, but this is pretty much, this sums up how I feel about the record. So Sweetie wrote, "The writing is too phoned in. The band is just rehashing ideas that the same lineup had already done better on previous albums, and it's trying to do what Dehumanizer already did." So, I aside from the cooler grunge aspects that we just pointed out, like, I think that perfectly sums it up.
I think it's nicer than I would say about it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course. Yeah. Yeah, it's fucking lazy. It you know, and even if there are people out there who love this record, but like I feel like, you know, if we're gonna trash talk, it's not even trash talking. If we're going to have negative commentary about a Sabbath record at any point in the series, this is the album to have. Like, I would trash this record over Forbidden. Like this album has given me, reviewing this album recently has given me a new appreciation for Forbidden.
I know, because that's part of the problem with this album, is there's nothing really interesting about it. Where I haven't really listened to Forbidden in a while, so I'm not going to get too much into how I'm going to feel about it listening to it again for the podcast.
Sure.
But at least, like, every Black Sabbath album, regardless of how much you like it or dislike it, I think really has, like, standout moments, things that are very distinct about them. That it's what makes them still great records. And this album does it. Yeah. And while I can think of something right off the top of my head as to why I would criticize Forbidden for, at least it stands out. Like, I heard Forbidden, and it still stood out to me. It grabs my attention enough. Where this album, even before going into it, I really couldn't remember anything about it. And
yep.
Now I know why. Because there's nothing worth remembering about it. Not even in like a funny kind of way. It's just not interesting. You know, with Forbidden, like I said, like I know I have my criticisms about it, but at least it's an album they're trying on.
Yeah.
What they tried to do might not have worked.
Right.
But it shows like a real effort by a band, and I can appreciate that more than I can appreciate this.
Sure. Yeah. I wasn't good. You brought up not being able to remember anything significant about it after listening to it, and you just triggered a memory of mine, and I wasn't going to bring this up because it's kind of a music theory thing, but there is one thing that I always think of when I think of this record, and it's something that I can't stand, and it is the opening of the first track. It's the opening of Eyewitness, and it's heavy on the keyboards, and what they're doing is, like, Actually, this opening riff of the opening song, it's like, it's a perfect way to let the listener know what they're in for. Because, no, this is what I don't like about it, and it's what a way to start the album, too. Like I like scary, orchestral sounding keyboards. Like, I like eerie keyboards, and I love Jeff Nichols. But the way this album starts, if you listen to that note progression, right when Eyewitness starts, it's going up a half step every time the note changes. So instead of writing a progression or even writing a riff, you're just going up a half step every single time. And it's like you're building to this climax, right, by doing that, and then nothing happens. So it's lazy writing, and it's also kind of a metaphor for blue balls. And that is the perfect way to let the listener know what they're in for the rest of the record. That's how I feel about the beginning of Eyewitness. But with that in mind, though, Jeff Nichols, he's still involved. He's the official fifth member by this point, I believe. I really like Jeff Nichols on this album. I think the keyboards on, you brought up this song too, Immaculate Deception, works so well with Tony Martin's vocal melodies, because he still can write a killer vocal melody in 1994. But again, the problem here is that it's the same problem I have with every other song on the record. These aren't bad songs, but these ideas were already performed better on previous Sabbath albums by roughly the same lineup. And I will say this to defend the track one last time. This is just Immaculate Deception. The solo fucking rips, and that solo in that song is probably the most unique and technical piece of guitar writing Iommi has on the entire record. But at the same time, it's not that memorable.
Yeah, the keyboard, is still probably the most standout part of this album.
Yep.
Again, it's something new. I mean, like, Jeff Nichols has been killing it. Maybe for what he does. I don't know if he just always reaches my expectations, or if my expectations are limited because of the context he's in. But yeah, some of the more standout parts on this album are definitely keyboard parts.
Yep.
And I feel like even a lot of those are buried more than they should be on this.
In the mix, especially, yeah, sure. That was definitely not a writing issue, but a production issue for me.
Yeah.
So it's generic, but and it's not one of my favorites, but I actually love the album cover. Just the angel with the burning wings. I guess I like the aesthetic of it. Like I said, I got that free poster, and it's not a bad poster. It's just not, it's aesthetically pleasing to me. It just represents a not so great album. So, do you hate the album cover, or are you just kind of indifferent because we're talking about cross purposes?
I don't really like the album cover to this. I feel like I should. I feel like it's a cool idea, but I think it's kind of poorly executed.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say to that is that what I would have appreciated something more artistic, to go with that. Like that image, but maybe instead of it being... Because this is basically a photo. It's basically an edited photo. Live action. But, maybe a cool illustration would have been even something closer to the cover of Forbidden, where it's animated, but it's still kind of creepy and dark. That would have been an improvement.
Yeah. This is definitely the point where I know we've discussed about Black Sabbath missing the mark with album artworks, but I think that they exceptionally missed the mark on this one, because for all intents and purposes, this should have been a great cover.
Sure.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
It's not just a group photo.
Yeah.
And it just kind of misses the mark.
The idea was better than the execution of the idea, yeah.
Yeah, kind of like the album.
Yep. Another perfect representation, another perfect way to let the audience know what they're in for if you haven't heard it yet.
Yeah. Judge this book by its cover.
So, when you and I reconvene, we will be revisiting Forbidden, and I cannot wait to dive into the hate given to that album for obvious reasons pertaining to a certain rap metal band.
I don't know how much hate I'm going to have for it anymore.
I am stoked to talk about Ernie C, Ice-T, Body Count. Ernie C producing a Sabbath album, and Ice-T rapping on a Sabbath song. I'm stoked to get into it. Like, I really am.
Spoiler alert, which I've already told, like how I thought that was a bad idea. But now I'm thinking, after listening to Cross Purposes, that those were still better ideas than this album.
Because it immediately makes it more interesting.
Exactly. It's something, that's what I mean. It's like it's something to talk about. It's something you're going to remember. And it's like, it shows an effort.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get into that more when we get to that album, because I feel like that's kind of a different type of criticism, though.
Sure.
Because it's a worthy, everything about Forbidden, just before we get into that, when we do the next episode, I do feel it's an album that was a worthy effort. It just didn't work out.
It didn't work out, but they really tried. They really tried with that one. And they tried to do something different. They stepped out of their comfort zone, you know? Right down to the production. And who was involved. And, yeah, like they really tried something different. And it just fell flat.
Yeah, but, and again, after listening to Cross Purposes, I can really appreciate that more now than I did before. Even though, I never really, but now I'd probably label it as my second least favorite Black Sabbath album.
Sure.
Who knows? I don't want to jump too much into that like we did last, even though we were a little still on the mark about how we felt about Cross Purposes.
Right. Yeah.
I kind of want to, wait to dive into it again to see,
It's so disappointing. It's so disappointing because as we were working through the discography in order, I was looking forward to Cross Purposes because I was looking forward to listening to it and having some kind of a revelation. You know what I mean? Like, oh God. I think you said the same thing. You were like, oh, wait, I never felt this way about this record before. This actually rips, and I just didn't get it before. I thought it was going to be like that, and then that did not happen.
No. I mean, but it's like you said, it's just the 3 albums before this, Headless Cross, Tear, and Dehumanizer, are such solid records.
Yeah.
They're such interesting, there's great songwriting. Everybody's firing on all cylinders with those albums, you know?
Yeah.
It's they are just there's no misses there. It's just 110% on all 3 of those.
Yeah, you almost need to hear Cross Purposes first to get it. If you're gonna listen to, right. If Cross Purposes, you said something similar to this already. If Cross Purposes were someone's first Black Sabbath album, it might rip, but because of not only how long we've been listening to the band, but the order that we listen to these records in to do this show, it doesn't compare at all.
Right. I meant that more as if it was a different band's first album.
Yeah, that was what you said. For sure.
But I guess the same thing, if this was the first time you ever heard Black Sabbath, you probably feel differently about it.
Sure.
Because you don't have anything to compare it to. You might not like it as much after the fact, but you probably wouldn't have such strong negative feelings about it.
Right.
I mean, because I can think that way about a lot of bands.
Yep.
There's bands where I got into kind of way after the fact, where everybody had all their... I was kind of late in the game getting into bands, in a punk sense, like Bad Brains.
Yep.
Or a metal sense, like Voivod. And because of that, I feel like it helps me appreciate their whole discography more.
Yeah.
Than, like, people who are, like, diehard fans from day one. I mean, obviously, we're too young to have been diehard fans of Black Sabbath since day one. But, you know, being into them long enough before this album came out, and then doing this podcast like this, and, you know, listening to everything in such, like, a more of a clinical manner, it just really shows how bad of a fucking album this is.
Right. Right.
And it's really tough to be forgiving about it because,
sure.
You know, I was just thinking about how, like, I listened to Tears so long since we got to that, until we did this, and just, like, a renewed, not that I never did, not that I ever had any dislike for Tear, but just giving me even a renewed appreciation for what a great album, like a really fucking just great, perfect album it was.
Yep.
And then to get to this.
Yeah, Tear and Headless Cross. And for me, Dehumanizer. Those three to me are perfect Sabbath records.
Yeah, and it's like...
I get it. Yeah, totally. Well, did you have anything else? Because I've been out of talking points for a minute.
No, I think I hit my main talking points on this. Like, basically, I just have my own theories as to my justifications to why this album is
sure
the way it is.
Right.
And, you know, it's a bummer.
Yep.
But I guess, you know, again, but it's their 17th album. I think Sabbath has had a much stronger run with so many albums than a lot of bands do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
I mean honestly,
they still, hey, even, I think, what did it say? It made it to, on the worldwide charts, I think it landed at, like, 122. But, I mean, just because it's Black Sabbath, I mean, think about how many other albums that Cross Purposes trumped, you know, while that was happening. And, you know, it's still... They set out to put out a record. They put out a record. They did their job. Beyond that, I'm not crazy about it. But they set out to put out a Black Sabbath album, and they accomplished their mission. So it's in the discography. We committed ourselves to talking about every album. We got to do them all. So Cross Purposes is on the list. We just talked about Cross Purposes.
I give this half a star out of 5.
Yeah. You get a half star. I was going to give you no stars, but I'm going to give you a pity half star. You know, not even a pity star, a pity half star.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll be in touch about Forbidden, and we'll jump into that at our next earliest convenience.
Yeah, you know what? Before we jump into Forbidden, we might have to put just a little longer wait before we get onto that, because I do have, even though I stand by everything I said, I should probably point out one other thing that might be souring my attitude about this album.
Sure.
It's fucking October, Mike.
Right.
October, I'm listening to Misfits.
Yeah.
Not fucking Black Sabbath.
I know.
I'm listening to the Misfits.
I know.
October is for the Misfits.
I know. No, you're right. The season has a lot to do with it. You're absolutely right. The season has a lot to do with it right now.
I should be listening to Headless Cross right now, not Cross Purposes.
That's right. Like it.
Headless Cross and Self-Titled are the Black Sabbath albums for October.
Sure. Or like you said, you know, great point about the Misfits. I mean, you know, on that note, I've been seeing Static Age a lot lately. Like, a lot of people have been just posting, because people do the now playing thing. Like, I've been seeing a lot of Static Age lately. People just posting the vinyl. So they've been on my mind as well for that reason. Yeah. 100%.
I mean, every Misfits album with Glenn Danzig is awesome.
Sure. Yeah, I never got into the grave stuff, really. I mean, I think I liked American Psycho in high school, and I think the next one after that was Famous Monsters, and that one just kind of, I feel the same way about Famous Monsters that I do about Cross Purposes, actually. Like, it was just, it was just a record, but nothing really, like, jumped out at me. But no, I love the whole Danzig era, for sure.
Yeah, so. Man, fucking Cross Purposes.
Fucking Cross Purposes.
I'm kidding about the October point.
Yeah.
It was when they crossed my mind, but second list, I was just like, nah, this record sucks.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can try to put a spin on it to save it, but at the end of the day, like, this is not a go-to Sabbath record or a go-to record, period.
Yeah. I might listen to it another time before I die.
Yeah. I have, Black Sabbath songs featuring Ice-T to listen to. I can't waste any more of my time on Cross Purposes.
Yeah. We should get Ice-T to do a little spot on the podcast.
Such a controversial period of the band we're in right now. And I love that. Bring it on.
I'm sure Ice-T will totally defend his entire part on that Black Sabbath album.
Sure. I can't wait to get into it because I just want to pick apart everything going on in the booth at that moment during the recording of Illusion of Power. Like, I want to know everything about that day in the studio.
Hey, you know what? I mean, like, whatever you want to say about it, though, later on, like, after that, when Black Sabbath, like, got back with Ozzy and Naomi were doing shit with fucking Wu-Tang Clan.
Yeah, right.
And it's awesome. It's all great, but then again, the theory I would use would basically be something where I would think, like, well, Forbidden should have been great, too, because fucking Ice-T.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't anything, even then it wasn't anything new, but no, it certainly wasn't the end of, like, those kind of, like, projects or collaborations.
Yeah. Anyhow, we'll have to revisit that before we talk too much about it. And repeating our words.
Oh, yeah. I don't want to get too deep into it, because I'm actually looking forward to it, giving it a couple spins and reading up.
Yeah, me too.
All right, well, you have yourself, unless you have something else, you have yourself a great night.
Yeah, you too, Mike.
All right, I will talk to you soon, and we'll get into Forbidden. Have a good one.